Today we're going to see how drunk our kombucha can get before it dies. We're going to do this by seeing what concentration of alcohol it takes to have an effect on our carbonation. And why would you want to do any of this? Sometimes it's fun to add booze to our kombucha. Most people would say this is kind of pointless because you could just make your kombucha perfectly and then add alcohol later, but I would never be excited to be handed a glass of mixer, so I don't think you should have to accept that either. And I've been thinking about this ever since our tiki episode, where at about the 5 to 6% mark, that's when we saw all of our carbonation die off. Is it because of the alcohol? Is it because of all the other nonsense we added? Who can say? And I have a few other, even less sensible experiments coming up where this is going to come into play. And just each little bit of information we pick up here, it's just kind of like another tool for the toolbox. We might not need it right now, but I think we're going to be referencing this again later. And just some notes about carbonation and alcohol before we get started. The yeast in our kombucha will use the sugar to produce alcohol and carbonation, whether or not they have oxygen. And different strains of yeast are going to be able to tolerate different levels of alcohol. If you're making something like beer and wine, you're using a single strain of yeast that can tolerate a pretty high concentration of alcohol. With kombucha, though, we've got 10 or more main strains of yeast, plus extras, and they're all going to be able to tolerate different amounts. Once it gets too high for them, they'll stop reproducing, and eventually the cells will die. So it could be that at 5 to 6%, we've killed most, but not all of the strains of yeast, but it's still not enough to produce carbonation for the entire bottle. But I'm not interested in, can any survive? I'm interested in, can I get good carbonation in a reasonable amount of time? And by reasonable, I would say 3 days. So if I have to wait a week, I'm no longer interested. And for this experiment, I'm going to use our strawberry daiquiri recipe from our lime episode, primarily because it carbonated well and it was really tasty. And to get to the appropriate ABV, I'm going to be using moonshine because it's a pretty efficient way to get there. The more alcohol we add, the more we're going to dilute our drink. And the percentages I'm aiming for are 0, 2, 6, 10, 14, and 20. And to get there is going to be a little bit of math because our kombucha this time is measuring at about 0.5% alcohol. And we're going to be diluting that down with fruit juices. The more of the moonshine we add, the less of the 0.5% kombucha we're going to get, and it's a bit of a balancing act. Another issue that might come into play here is that the yeast are using sugar from our drink to produce this carbonation. And the more alcohol there is, the less room there is for our sweetened kombucha. But I don't think that's going to be too big of a problem because this should be sweet enough that none of them are in any danger of using up all their sugar. I think that gets us all up to speed, so let's make some flavoring. And just so that we make sure that we get all of our flavors even, I'm going to mix a full batch here in our main fermenter. To start, I've got 2 pounds of strawberries here that I have frozen and then unthawed again to turn them a bit to mush. Primarily because I only had 2 pounds of strawberries, so this is going to be a bit of an improvisation. It's going to be as strawberry-y as it can be. I don't like that rhymed. It's going to be as strawberry-y as I can make it. But ideally, I'm looking for about 510 milliliters. A little under 500, but not too bad. And we're going to set this aside for a moment to portion out our bottles. Because next up we need 1/4 teaspoon of lime zest for each bottle. Which, if you watched the lime episode, I didn't want this to be a vital part of the recipe. But unfortunately, here we are. Now it's time to portion out our moonshine. This is 128 proof, so 64% alcohol. And for our first bottle, we're aiming for 0% ABV, so we're already done. But for our second bottle, we're adding 12 grams. Or 14 grams. Bottle number 3 gets 42. It didn't take very long for us to get to a significant volume. Bottle number 4 is 71 grams of our moonshine. And if you're curious or just don't know, moonshine is unaged whiskey. Bottle number 5 gets 110 grams. And for our final bottle, we're going for 146 grams of this. An amount that, even if this improved carbonation, I can't imagine I would ever want to drink. I would bet this doesn't improve the flavor. Now that those are all filled, I'm going to add a bit of simple syrup to our strawberry juice because it tastes better. And then I want to add about 144 grams of lime juice, but I'm going to add these and just see how it tastes. This is looking like about 24 grams of juice per lime, with an admittedly small sample size. So we might need to add a few more, but we're going to see how this tastes first. It's either going to need more lime or more sugar syrup. More syrup. If this is the first video you've watched here, just know that this isn't how I like to flavor my kombucha. It's getting a little too sweet, which is generally the goal before bottling, but I wanted a little notch higher. It's pretty good. It would be better if it was more sour, so I think we're in the right spot. So now we're ready to start bottling, and I'm going to add the extra layer of this small strainer here, just to make sure we don't get too much of that strawberry pulp that got through the juicer. Primarily because I don't like when there's puree in my kombucha, not just for drinking, but the fact that it tends to volcano in my face. Now that they're all bottled, I'm going to put them at 78 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 days. And that should be enough to tell us if the alcohol has had an effect on the carbonation. So I will see you then. After 3 days of carbonation and another day in the refrigerator, we're ready to test. And I'll say before we begin that there was bubbles of carbonation in every single bottle. There was noticeably less in the higher alcohols, but it was still there and present. So it could be that all of these, it's possible to carbonate them properly with enough time. I just will not be doing that. I'm going to start here with our first bottle, our 0% ABV, which I think is the most likely to explode. No, okay, well. Seems like pretty good carbonation. You can taste it, you can feel it. It's a delicious strawberry daiquiri, but that's unrelated to the issue at hand. I think this is going to be our gold standard. Next up, we've got our 2%. I would say noticeably less carbonation. And noticeably more of a scent of moonshine. More than anything, I feel like the flavor of the moonshine kind of just cuts through some of that brightness in the daiquiri. There's definitely less effervescence, less acidity. There's still carbonation, it's just, I can taste that like thick corn moonshine taste. I'm going to have to start pouring smaller glasses here before long. Let's try the next. Bottle number 3 is our 6% ABV, a point where I have traditionally lost all carbonation. But I would say this one doesn't look too different from our 2%. It smells quite different, though. It smells quite strong. Okay. There's a hint of strawberry, but otherwise it's a very thick, cloying mouthfeel of just straight grain alcohol. All of the lime is long gone. I don't feel any carbonation. I don't smell any strawberry. I'm glad I did this on a day off. Filming another brewing recipe after this, and I feel like that's going to be very loosely formatted now. Bottle number 4 is 10% ABV. There's 2 bubbles, but I don't know if that quite counts as carbonation. Just pouring it out, it had a thick strawberry syrup sort of consistency. There's not a smell of strawberry anymore, but there is a general kind of fruitiness. Yeah. And I think that goes for the taste as well. There's a distant note of fruitiness, but then you're just drinking moonshine. I probably didn't need to start drinking these at 10 a.m. Well, this is turning out the only way it could have turned out, I suppose. There's no longer any strawberry smell. I can taste more of the strawberry pulp, but otherwise it's just straight shine. And lastly, we've got our final bottle of 20% ABV. I don't think I need that much of this. It is kind of interesting. It is kind of interesting how the flavor changes with each addition of alcohol, because as we add more, it kind of strips away more layers of flavor. I don't know which bottle it was, but it kind of tasted like strawberry pulp. But now it's been stripped away to the point where it's got kind of a watermelon rind sort of taste. It's like a cocktail made of cucumber, watermelon rind, and grain alcohol. I suppose that there's worse things to drink, but none are coming to mind. So what did we learn from all this? Where does that leave us? I would say there was a pretty dramatic decrease in carbonation between 0% and 2%. That's not much less yeast or fermentable sugar in the bottle to explain that drop in carbonation. I feel like it had an effect on the yeast inside. And then once we got to the 6% mark, it was almost no trace of carbonation left. But since we did see bubbles of carbonation in all 6 bottles, it does make me think it's possible to carbonate these bottles. And I think despite everything else that I've said, I would consider it if I had something in the 2 to 6% ABV range. If I went back and remade it in cocktails, I think I would give it a 4th or 5th day just to see where it lands. There are distinctly bubbles even in this 20% ABV, so I don't think it's too unreasonable. I just don't know if it would taste good or be worth the time. But certainly valuable information if I want to try to make a zombie or a Mai Tai again. Or even just in our regular strawberry daiquiri. I think I did try to get it up to 2%. And it's good to know that maybe that's going to need an extra day. So I guess I'm going to try and sober up because my mouth is just fogging out alcohol. But thank you for joining us. This is Reckless Booch.